Pittsburgh Steelers fans, it is 9 a.m. on the East Coast, but it's 2 a.m. somewhere. Yes, my name is Mr. 2 a.m. I'm Bryan Anthony Davis from BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. The face you see alongside me is a face that I'm seeing for the first time, although I've talked to him about 25 times in the last 4 months. It's Kevin Smith. You might know him as Cliff Harris is a punk as well on BTSC. He is our coach extraordinaire. He's our X's and O's guy. Kevin, I'm so glad to have you on the show with me.
Brian, how are you, man? Steelers fans, what's happening?
It's so great to see you and talk to you. And I got to tell you, the great thing about this, having you on this show, you do X's and O's for us all the time. And this is a little different because this is more about memories. And when I thought about having guests on the show, because we're going to start rotating, having guests each and every week from BTSC, what I was thinking of is guys like me that have been through a lot of AFC Championship games, since it is AFC Championship weekend. And when I first heard of you, you were Cliff Harris is still a punk. And that shows how much you look back into the history and of the Steelers and from that game, Super Bowl 10. That's awesome. So I knew you would have some great stories and great memories of the Steelers fighting to get into the Super Bowl, which they have done once again 16 times, and they've won 8 of them. So that's absolutely phenomenal. And that's all been since 1972. Kevin, before we get into that, I just want to ask you real quick, what does AFC Championship weekend mean to you, whether or not the Steelers are into it?
I'll be honest. I think for me, I got more nervous about AFC Championship games than I did about Super Bowls, because getting to the Super Bowl is, your season's a success if you get to the Super Bowl. No question about that. You're so close. Like the AFC Championship is just like, that final step to get there. And once you get there, of course you want to win it, of course. But being in the Super Bowl is in and of itself a unique accomplishment. It doesn't happen, very often. Like you said, 16 AFC Championship games, 8 Super Bowl trips. So to win to get into the Super Bowl is just in and of itself a unique and really, really exciting thing. So and plus, you got bragging rights over your boys who aren't Steelers fans. I mean, I live in Eagles country. And so, the Eagles are a tortured fan base, to say the least. And to be able to say the Steelers are in the Super Bowl has always been a big thing for me. And even if somebody, breaks your stones about them not winning or whatever, you got there. So I was always really nervous on AFC Championship Day because getting to the Super Bowl meant so much to me.
And as Steeler fans, we have been blessed and spoiled to have seen the Pittsburgh Steelers play in every single decade since their first AFC Championship appearance. When do you remember your first AFC Championship game, Kevin?
So the first football game I ever really remember watching was Super Bowl 10, and that's really where the Cliff Harris screen name came from. The indelible moment of Lambert throwing Cliff Harris to the ground, and that made me a Steelers fan for life, that game. So I remember then, of course, watching them religiously, and every time the Steelers were on, I had to be in front of the TV. And you didn't get to see them every week where I grew up in South Jersey. So again, this is the 1970s, 1980s, even into the early 2000s, where it's basically like whatever the network is putting on TV in your region, that's it. There's no live stream, there's no NFL ticket, there's none of that stuff. So for the Steelers to be on was a big deal for me. So I remember the next year when they went out to Oakland in the AFC Championship game without Franco Harris, without Rocky Bleier, banged up. Maybe now I didn't realize it at the time, but now when you look back, might have been the best of all those 70s teams. That defense in 76 was just unbelievable. But I mean, I was a little kid. I was like 6 or 7 years old. I didn't have any idea. I just knew that I was a Steelers fan. And they lost to the Raiders, Kenny Stabler, and that that band of Raiders. My dad used to be like, they're a bunch of felons. He hated Jack Tatum and George Atkinson.
Hey, Chuck Noll called him the criminal element.
Yeah. And I remember them losing that game, and I just remember crying, and having to just sort of like come to terms with like the first football game I remember, the Steelers won the Super Bowl. So you just figured as a little kid, that's what happens. The Steelers win the Super Bowl. And then all of a sudden they lose that AFC Championship game. And it's like, oh, wait a minute. That's not what happens all the time.
Was your dad a Steelers fan?
Oh, no. My father was a Cleveland Browns fan.
That's right.
Yes, and is currently a Baltimore Ravens fan. He pulled the plug on the Browns when they left Cleveland.
Wow.
And now, is a Ravens fan. So let's just say that we don't get together on Sundays to watch Steelers games.
So you're John Banaszak then?
I'm Jon Banaszak?
Yeah, you're Jon Banaszak. Have you ever heard that story?
No.
Jon Banaszak signed as a free agent, an undrafted free agent with the Steelers in 1976. And he called up his dad and his parents, and his dad, who was a diehard Cleveland Browns fan, was like, I don't know if I can do this. He was disappointed. Yeah. Like, why didn't you go to the Browns? He was really disappointed. Then Banaszak's dad became the biggest fan of the Steelers when his son John, number 76, was on the team. So I just thought that was really neat. And we have a current Steeler that has a diehard Browns fan. Justin Lane's dad is a diehard Cleveland fan as well. He had a Browns bathroom, and they converted it into a black and gold bathroom. So there's that's a neat little connection there. So there you go. You have the Banaszak connection now that you never knew.
Yeah, I did not know that. Yeah.
I have a Banaszak connection too, just for the fact that, I had friends that went to W&J when he was coaching there, but also my first number when I played Pee Wee football was 76.
Oh, okay.
I was like, I'm Banaszak.
Yeah.
And Banaszak was paramount in a lot of those Super Bowls, 13 and 14. He was a very big player in those games and those AFC Championship games. Usually on the show, we talk about the current week for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It has been a crazy week. Everybody has talked about it ad nauseum, but the main highlights this week before we get into the AFC Championship game, Dwayne Haskins is a Pittsburgh Steeler. He is not the replacement for Ben Roethlisberger. He's a guy that you throw him to the wall, see if he sticks. If he does, awesome. You have a gem, because people don't realize he's a futures contract. You remember the last huge futures contract that the Pittsburgh Steelers signed, and nobody knew who he was, and it ended up being awesome. He's a guy that stuck. Mike Hilton.
Yes. Okay. Mike Hilton. Right.
So Hilton was in December of 2016. Towards the end of the season, he was on the practice squad. He was originally drafted by Jacksonville, ended up with in camp with New England, and he was the guy opposite Senquez Golson, who they took in 2015. The Steelers did as their second round draft pick. He was the guy on the other side, the other corner. He's the guy that stuck. Senquez never even played a preseason game. I could talk a whole lot about that. Jeff Hartman, Dave Schofield, and I debate about what kind of pick he actually was, because they say he was a bust. Well, I'm like, you never play, you can't be a bust. But I digress. The pick might have been a bust, but I like to get into all that. So Dwayne Haskins is here. Real quick, what does this signing mean to you?
I'm doing a film room on him right now, and when I look at the film, I just see like a guy who's unpolished and not ready to be a starter, who got thrown to the wolves in Washington. I mean, they put him in a position. They put him in a position to fail, which is like the last thing you ever want to do to a player. And it's not all on them. I mean, Dwayne Haskins clearly didn't do the right things, and you read all the stories about poor work ethic and not being a great teammate and those things. So he certainly played a part in his own failure there. But they set him up to fail in many regards. I mean, the guy just was not ready. The coaching staff didn't want to put him on the field. From what you read, Dan Snyder, wanted to create a buzz about his quarterback. He thought it would be good for the team, for merchandise and attendance, and get the first round draft pick on the field ASAP. And I think it was really detrimental to his development. So you get him into Pittsburgh and get him in a good system. I think it seems like Matt Canada is going to become the OC, and his system I think will be good for a guy like Haskins. And then you let him sit for a little bit and develop, and it might work out. And if it doesn't cost you a whole lot.
Speaking of Canada, most likely being the AC because of the OC, because of the Rooney Rule, they had to go ahead and look at a couple more coaches. They only had to look at one. They looked at two more coaches for that post, which was very beneficial as far as I'm concerned, because there's a possibility that you can get another assistant coach out of this deal by looking at more of these coaches like a Hugh Jackson. Pep Hamilton was in the mix. He's no longer in the mix because he's now the new offensive coordinator at Detroit. Congratulations to him. I would have loved to have seen Pep come in. The problem is Pep might have not been able to come in as the quarterback's coach because it's a lateral move. That's what what he was previously doing in Los Angeles for the Chargers. So no matter how you slice it, whether it's Canada as the OC or Hugh Jackson as the OC, this is a great embarrassment of riches for the Steelers if they can have both of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, Hugh Jackson, people remember because he didn't succeed as a head coach in Cleveland, and they probably watched a little bit of Hard Knocks, or there's at times in Hard Knocks where, you know, he didn't seem like he was assertive enough, or there's that famous scene where Todd Haley's kind of ripping the culture and seems to be indirectly taking shots at Hugh Jackson. And so I think people sometimes might hear that name and be soured by it, but you got to remember, man, he was a really good offensive coordinator and has an excellent reputation as a position coach. And I'm a big fan of putting former head coaches on your coaching staff, because so long as you can handle the personalities, and so long as, you know, it's not like a situation where you have, you know, too many chefs in the kitchen, as long as everybody knows their role and is able to do their role well, then I think that the experience that they bring, the perspective that they bring, and just sort of a greater sense of like kind of gravitas, you know, knowing that you've got a guy who was a former NFL head coach in the coaching room, I think that that's excellent. And, you know, the Steelers need to, you know, upgrade their coaching staff, no doubt. And I would not object to that move at all.
All right. So I have a correction on here. Dave Schofield, the Oracle. Thank you so much, Dave, for mentioning that. I knew this and I messed this whole thing up. Anthony Lynn, who was the head coach of the Chargers, he is the new offensive coordinator in Detroit, and he's the guy who I wanted in Pittsburgh from the beginning. Pep is still interviewing with them, so he might possibly go there as an assistant offensive coordinator or a quarterback's coach, something like that. So, Dave, thanks for pointing that out to us. There is still, I mean, you never know what's going to happen here, but you would think that if Detroit could find room for Pep somewhere, that might be a possibility. So, scratch what I said about Pep being the new offensive coordinator. I need to go change my article for Fact or Fiction too, because I put that in last night thinking I was going to sound all smart, and I made a mistake. So thanks again, Dave, for letting me know that. And with Pep still interviewing, that'll be interesting. But the big thing that we're talking about here is the AFC Championship games. We've got two great matchups. Jeff Hartman says this. He's like, any way you slice it, this is going to be a fantastic Super Bowl. And I think for the first time, this is a Final Four that I really believe that will be a great game any way you go. The only game that I don't want to see, because this is just my thing, this is my BAD thing, I hate repeats in Super Bowls, even though this would be a repeat from the 1966 season. I just don't want Green Bay and Kansas City, although I feel that would be the best matchup. I just like to see two different helmets on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, they will be great games. I'm pulling for the Bills. I just feel like that's a fan base that has paid its dues and then some. And I remember, you know, very, very clearly, if we're talking about AFC Championship games, I remember very, very clearly the run that they had in the early 90s when they, you know, went 4 straight Super Bowls and were never able to win. Can you imagine as a Steelers fan if the Steelers made it to 4 straight Super Bowls and were never able to win one of them? I mean, that would just put the torture in torture, man. I just Buffalo would just feel. I just feel like, you know, that they deserve it, you know, and I'm gonna pull hard for them.
Okay, so this is my what if game that I do a lot. Say the Steelers won, they come back and beat Cleveland, and somehow they beat Buffalo, and they're in this AFC Championship game. Look, live chat, I know they're not. I know they're not. And so somebody's going to come in and is like, well, they couldn't even beat Cleveland. What are you talking about? Look, this is with my show. I like to think outside of the box. So I'm going to ask you, if Pittsburgh was in this game in Kansas City today, what would have this game looked like?
I mean, Patrick Mahomes, right? He's a problem. He's a problem for everybody. And I know that the Steelers have done fairly well against high-profile quarterbacks and guys that move out of the pocket and things like that. And I know that Mahomes is dinged up and was out of the game last week and cleared the concussion protocol. But he's a problem, and he's a problem because of two reasons. One, he's phenomenally gifted and talented, and two, Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy are doing a phenomenal job with that offense of just sort of finding ways to constantly attack a defense with new formations, new personnel groups, new pre-snap movements. I mean, they seem to do things every week that you just haven't seen from them before. And they're doing, they're kind of putting new looks on old concepts constantly, and they're really hard to prepare for. So, if the Steelers had been in this matchup at Kansas City, let's just say they'd have their hands full. I really think that this is an extremely talented Kansas City team. You got to outscore them. That's why I think Buffalo's got a shot. And I just don't know if the Steelers would be able to generate enough points to hang with this Kansas City team.
I don't think they would either. That would have been the would have, could have, Dave says, and it's good to have the Oracle. I love when Dave comes in here too. It would have been Steelers versus Ratbirds because they would have beat KC if Mahomes still goes down. That's interesting too. Yeah, ifs and nuts and ifs and buts and candies and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. We did. So we're looking towards 2021. That's aside. Let's jump in that DeLorean. Let's go back in time to the Pittsburgh Steelers in the AFC Championship game. Like we talked about, the Steelers are 8-8 in AFC Championship games. Now, a lot of those wins, we know that 4 of those wins happened in the 1970s. I was cognizant for most of them. The early ones I have not had a chance to watch live, but I saw them because we do the retro show. I go back and watch this. I have not watched the 24-7 loss to the Oakland Raiders that you mentioned earlier. I'm actually going to watch that, try to examine what went right, what went wrong. I have been to 3 AFC Championship games as a fan. Let's see, 2 of them in Heinz Field, 1 in Three Rivers Stadium. And my friends will never let me go again because I'm 0-3 in AFC Championship games. However, the year I decided to stop going is the year they finally got in and won a Super Bowl. So you've been to an AFC Championship game, and it was one of elation, I'm sure. Let's talk about that game first.
Yeah. So, right, I was at the AFC Championship game after the 95 season when the Steelers beat the Colts to get to the Super Bowl where they played Dallas. And, I remember 2 things about that game. One, I mean, it was freezing. I mean, I just remember it was cold, man. And, Three Rivers Stadium, that was back at old Three Rivers, and it was that old concrete bowl that they had, that was the design for stadiums in the 70s.
Yep.
And it held the noise, but it seemed to hold the cold for whatever reason. I don't know why that was.
The place was freezing.
Yeah. And I don't remember a ton of details about the game other than a couple things. One, coming off of what for me is maybe the worst, other than the 2 Super Bowl losses, the worst loss that I can remember as a Steeler fan, which was the 94 AFC Championship game against San Diego, which is crushing. And you talk to any Steeler fan who was old enough to remember it, and it was just crushing because we were all convinced that the Steelers were going to the Super Bowl. It had been 15 years, since the last appearance, and for me, those 15 years were my high school years and my college years, which is like when you're a fan, those are the prime years of where you're just so emotionally invested.
Me too.
Yeah. So it took a long time to get over that 94 loss, but then they get back in 95 and they're playing another underdog team, the Colts. The Colts had upset the Chiefs on the road, so we got them at home. Harbaugh was their quarterback, and there's nothing more annoying than a Harbaugh. And
say it right, a Wang Harbs.
And it came down to the last play, man. It came down to the last play. And I just remember, they threw that it wasn't even really a Hail Mary because they were actually at around the 30-yard line or so. And what's crazy is that in those old stadiums, those bowls held the noise, man. It was so loud in Three Rivers, so much louder than it gets at Heinz Field. And the noise would reverberate. It would feel like things were shaking. And when that pass, I distinctly remember this. When that pass went up in the air, that stadium got dead silent. That ball just sort of hung up in the air for it seemed like an eternity of dead silence. And when it came down, there was a moment where it kind of looked like one of the Colts receivers caught the ball. And then finally you saw the incomplete signal. And it wasn't even elation at that point. It was just relief. I remember just my buddies and I just kind of hugging each other and being exhausted and being like, let's go get a beer and collapse somewhere,
I remember that game well too, because I did not go to that game, but I was at a friend's house. I was actually at a Dallas Cowboy fan's house who wanted me to come to the Super Bowl the next week or 2 weeks later. And I would not go because I wasn't going to go to the game. I stayed home by myself to watch that game. I was invited to a couple parties that year and I was like, nope, I'm staying home. I want to absorb this and enjoy it. I will have Super Bowl parties now. But the rule now is anybody is allowed in my house. It could be an AFC Championship game. If you're a Baltimore fan, you can come to my house. But if it's a Super Bowl, Steeler fans only. That's for the Super Bowl party. Now, I had one game, which I believe it was Denver and Carolina back in 2015, the 2015 season. I had 46 people in my house, all huddled in there trying to watch that game, sitting everywhere.
Terrible game. That game was like the Steelers playoff game, man. That game was over. Boom.
Well, I mean, it looked like the desert in the second half. It really did. But I've had so many people there. So I went to this guy's house, and I was living in West Virginia at the time. And you can buy alcohol on Sundays, but it was after 1:00 and it had to be at the supermarket. So my one friend wanted to get champagne. He was a season ticket holder. He wanted to get champagne. He wasn't at the game either. So what we did was we got champagne, and just in case, and I was like, we're going to miss the first 10 minutes of the game, and we did, but he insisted on doing it. So we had the champagne there, and like you said, when that ball hung up in the air, it felt like an eternity. And there were so many spots in that game as well where it just looked like they were losing. I mean, there was an interception late for Indianapolis, and it looked like they were going to, have that game in hand. Then Neal throws a perfect ball down the sidelines to Ernie Mills.
Yep.
That's a question for you. That Ernie Mills ball, 45 yards, I believe, in the air. Is that a catch in today's NFL?
There's a couple of those games in the AFC Championships where you look at that and you say, how would that all played out? I mean, Houston Oilers / Tennessee Titans fans are still bitter about the Mike Renfro non-touchdown. In that might have been 1980, I think.
It was, and I'll tell you, let me do a plug real quick. Tony and I recorded a retro show yesterday. It is premiering. It premiered this morning at 5 a.m. of that exact game, and we extensively look at that Renfro catch and what it really meant. And a lot of people don't realize that final score was 27-13. And, Pastorini said that, it wouldn't have mattered anyways. That wasn't the reason we lost. They still got 3 points out of that drive too. That just would have made the score 17-17. But Tony brought up a good point that the Steelers of that era, they would have not they would have not surrendered. A tie would have been nothing for them. They would have broken wide open, and they got the ball back twice, scored 2 touchdowns on them, and I mean, scored 10 more points. The rest was history.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but when I think about like Steelers rivals when I was younger, I hated the Raiders because you hated the Cowboys. As I got older, like as you mature, you don't like harbor as much like hate for these opponents. You dislike them, whatever. But I never hated the Oilers because I loved Earl Campbell. I mean, Earl Campbell. There was something so deeply satisfying as a kid of watching Earl Campbell run through grown men like me trampling through my 7-year-old and his friends. That just, how could you not love it? If you were a Steelers fan, and I mean, you grew up on physical football. My buddies and I played a game. There was this bank in our neighborhood at the corner, and they had like a hedged in little grassy area at the bank. And the hedged in grassy area could not have been more than like 10 yards by 10 yards. And when the bank would close, we'd go over there and we'd climb through the hedges. And we would play a game we called Steel Curtain. And Steel Curtain was, 5 guys on 5 or however many guys we had. And you had to run the football. There were no passes. You had to run the ball. And the end zone was the hedge. And so like you
that sounds awesome and brutal.
We just killed each other. We would pad up, put on as many sweatshirts and jackets as we could to dull the blows. And then just go absolutely I mean, you're knocking guys into the hedges, through the hedges onto the concrete. And to us, that was what football was, right? And so Earl Campbell kind of did that in live action. So as though, I'm deeply satisfied that the Steelers beat them twice in those 2 AFC Championship games. But I was always a big fan of his.
I really was too, and I want to talk more about that game, and I want to finish up with the Indianapolis game as well. But this is what this show's all about. And, when you're on a show with Bryan Anthony Davis, you're going to jump around because that's what I absolutely do. But real quick, so that ball hangs in the air.
Yeah.
It comes down. I didn't know what was going on. And I called my dad for the last play. This was the first AFC Championship. This was the first time I was away from home. I was probably about 23 years old. I had moved to a new town for a radio career, and I was there. So I called up my dad to listen to the last play together. And I'm like, what happened? What happened? Did he catch it? Did we win? I mean, I had no clue. And I got my answer when champagne was running down my head because they picked me as the guy they would pour the champagne over. And it's a wonderful feeling. But man, that champagne stings the eyes. I'm telling you, but it's a good sting.
Yeah, for sure. That was us. That we were pretty high up in that. We were in the second bowl at Three Rivers, and we were actually kind of in the corner of the end zone. We had a pretty good view looking down on it, and you could kind of see the way as the play set up from that angle that one of the Colts players, I don't remember who it was, but he kind of had like an NBA player going up for a rebound. He had pretty good box out position. And so as the ball's coming down and you look at that, there's this snapshot moment where you're like, oh, this looks bad, man. He's in good position to catch this. And then it was just a bunch of bodies going up. And like you said, man, about a second there where the refs, I don't think, knew what was going on before they made that call. So, it's incredible how much emotional investment you have in something you have no control over whatsoever. If the Colts, if they somehow come down with that and win that game and go to the Super Bowl, I mean, coming off of the Chargers loss the year before, I mean, that's like emotionally devastating. And we have no control over these things, and yet we would have been emotionally devastated by them.
Let me ask you this. You are a championship winning coach, and you in the high school ranks, and you just talked about separating it. Is it harder to watch a game than to coach a game because you can try to control more as a coach?
Oh, 100%. My parents are wonderful. They're still alive, and they come to all of our games, and my dad says all the time, he's like, I don't know how you do it as a coach. He's like, these games are nerve-wracking. Our championship game this past year came down to we got an interception on our own 2-yard line with about 20 seconds left. We were ahead 12-7 to win the game, but as the other team took over on their own won. We tried to put the game away. We're winning 12-7, and we had fourth and goal at the 1, and we went for it and didn't get it. And so now they got about 3.5 minutes, and they got to go 99 yards, and they're just moving the ball down the field, so tick, 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 and they're getting down the field, getting on. Then they drive down to about our 30, and they wound up throwing an interception at the 2, and we kneeled out the clock to win it. But my dad was like, that was so nerve-wracking. How do you coach in those environments? And I was like, you don't even notice it when you're coaching, like I mean, you're just so invested. There's no time to step back and think about the pressure or what's real, like as a fan, you get up, you pace, you walk around. I don't know. I'm a big pacer when I watch games. I don't know how you are.
Oh.
I probably put 10,000 steps on my,
Yeah, it's basically third down, 2 minutes left. Or when it's a drive and they need to come from behind or they need to stop, I'm up. Everybody in the room is up. And we've got one guy that's a major pacer. I'm more of a rocker when it comes to, I'll just rock back and forth, and I'll even get in position like I'll just get down, and then I'll do this when the play happens. I have to stop and freeze and wait to see what happened, and then I can relax.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, what I want to do here is I want to go ahead and break down the fourth wall and talk about what we talked about off camera. I promised you a 40-minute show. We've had some great memories. We're going to get ready to do a second half. Would you like to stick around? I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you like to stick around for the second half and talk about some more memories?
Let's do it.
All right. So we're going to take a break. If you are checking us out on YouTube or Facebook, you know the drill. You just stick around, stretch real quick. We're going to be back in 5 seconds. If you're checking us out on any of the podcast platforms that you download BTSC and all of your favorite podcasts, just go ahead, click over to number 2 of Tales from 2 a.m. We'll be back right after this. It's AFC Championship Sunday. My name is Bryan Anthony Davis. Alongside me is Kevin Smith. It is, I was going to say the Steelers Retro Show. It is not, but it feels like a retro show as we have Tales from 2 a.m. once again. And if you're wondering, I confuse people with this because they think the show's going to be on at 2 a.m. No, I am Mr. 2 a.m. It's not an inside joke because people know about it. They watched the show over the last year and a half. Has a lot with to do with the 2019 Steelers and how I explained their winning at the time was you just take it, and it's kind of like 2 a.m. So that's why this show is Tales from 2 a.m. I'm Mr. 2 a.m., your host, but it's great to have some great co-host with me. Kevin Smith is here once again. You know him as Cliff Harris is still a punk. You know him as KT Smith. He is my partner on the Steelers pregame show. We have no pregame to talk about, so we're talking about past game. And the past games are great AFC Championship games in Steeler history. Once again, they have been in 16 AFC Championship games. They have won 8 of them. There are so many great memories of them. You talked, Kevin, we just talked about the Indianapolis game. That was a fantastic game in 1995. It was actually January of 1996 when they played that game. One of my great memories, and I know Jeff Hartman talks about that a lot. Dave Scofo talks about those games a lot because that's a lot of the time that people found their fandom. The Avoid Lloyd and the Blitzberg and Kevin Greens and Rod Woodsons and even O'Donnell. I mean, that was the era where a lot of people found the Steelers. You and I found the Steelers at a different time. We were so blessed to find them so much earlier. I mean, it means we're older, but we found them in the late 70s. Now, one of the first AFC Championship games that I remember watching, and we just talked about it, the Mike Renfro game, January 7th, 1980. It was the Steelers and the Oilers in Three River Stadium. And Kevin, you might lose some respect for me, but remember, I was 8 years old. I was partially rooting for the Steelers to lose that game. And you're going to, everybody in the live chat's going to be like, oh! But there's a reason. It was not because I like the Oilers. It is because my parents pulled me in the kitchen and told me that my uncle offered them, if the Steelers won the game, 2 tickets to the Super Bowl. And I was not going, but if the Steelers win, we're going to Pasadena in California. I'm 8 years old. I'm scared to death of them getting on the plane. I don't want to be left home with grandma. I want to go to the game because when you grow up as a Steelers fan in Western Pennsylvania, where I grew up in Johnstown, PA, and it's still Western Pennsylvania. I mean, you pull out the map. I don't care. It's Western PA. I'm just telling you that right now. So what? I'm looking at the live chat. Thaddeus Kennedy said, "Bad. I stretched really quick, like you said, and I think I pulled my hamstring." I am sorry. I'm really sorry. That's something I would do. So I feel for you. So I didn't want them to win that game because I was scared that what if they get on a plane and it crashes? And that's what happens. I just turned 8.
I thought you were going to say you were running like an 8-year-old bookie scheme and all the money was on the Steelers, man. So,
hey, Mr. 2 a.m. would have done that. Yeah. So even a young Mr. 2 a.m. But the game starts and I get in the fever right away. Vernon Perry picks off the ball. It's a pick 6 on the first drive. It is now 7-0 Oilers. And I'm like, I don't want this. This isn't right. I mean, all these people around us, cheering like crazy for the Steelers. I felt the fever and I felt the disappointment. I'm like, all right, they can go. That's no problem. And they did. And I've got some more stories about that, which I will wait and tell you more about that when we do the Super Bowl show. It has to do with Terry Bradshaw admonishing me. Actually, in person, he yelled at me for this. And it's about respecting my dad. And this was just a couple years ago because we were joking around. I told him the story at an autograph signing. So we will save that for 2 weeks from now. That's a reason to come back. So, but they win that game. And I remember that is one of the games that really set my fanhood ablaze.
You know what I remember about that game? I remember how wet it was and the Steelers sliding across the turf. It's kind of hydroplaning into the end zone. Blyer, I think Bradshaw, it just was a disastrous conditions.
Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to correct you on that. That was the week before. That was the year before.
Oh, was that the year before?
That was the one to go to Super Bowl 13 because the cover of Sports Illustrated has Bradshaw basically on his back hydroplaning.
Yeah.
It's real. Yeah, that was the 34-5 game.
Yeah.
Houston was so good. And you mentioned Earl Campbell in that second game that we were talking about, that 1980 game. What happened? The great Earl Campbell, Pittsburgh shut him down. 17 carries for 15 yards. Or it was 15 carries for 17 yards, something like that. They really shut him down, and that was the key to winning that game because you shut that guy down. You shut down number 34, you're going to win the game. So after that game, Steelers had their 4th Super Bowl. Next thing you know, there's a lull. They don't go to the playoffs in 80. They don't go in 81. They're there in 82, but in 83, but they're ousted right away. And one of my favorite years, and Tony Defeo and I talk about this all the time, Kevin, is that 1984 season. That's when Jon Stalworth comes back for that season and has an amazing year. So they surprised Denver in Mile High right before the new year. And they get to go and face Danny Marino in a second year and the mighty Miami Dolphins to go to the Super Bowl. This is a 9-7 team.
Yep.
Mark Malone actually had a really good game. Jon Stalworth, of all of his AFC Championship games, had his best AFC Championship game in 1984. So to give you an idea, he played in 6 AFC Championship games. He had only 13 catches in 6 AFC Championship games for 244 yards. But where he was so great, he had 5 TDs in AFC Championship games. So he was scoring points. And that's what you need more than anything. But he was 4 for 111 in that game and 2 touchdowns. But the Dolphins were way too much. But I remember that game, January 5th, 1985. 1984 is one of my favorite years, not just for the Steelers, but of all time. That's when I was 12. That's kind of the year where you find yourself. I was going into 8th grade. I absolutely love that year. But this is one of my favorite teams.
I'll tell you real quick about that game. So I was 14 years old. I had some, like freshman in high school girlfriend that I was, like dating, whatever we were doing. I don't know. And we're hanging out, on the playground in the town that I grew up in. And I just, it was, I don't remember if it was a 1:00 game for, I don't know when, I think it was a 1:00 game, but I remember I just said, I got to go, man. The Steelers are on. And she was not happy about it. And, she said something like, if you leave right now, we're not going out anymore. And that was the end of that relationship because I was out,
That's a true fan.
Yeah. 14 years old, whatever. So you got to do what you got to do, man.
Yeah, hey, there's priorities, and you had black and gold priorities at the time for a Jersey kid. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Ezra, I put it up there. 1984, he was breakdancing. I was attempting to breakdance. Oh, really bad at that. I'm just not a good dancer. I will tell you that. I'm not good at impressions.
You're gonna pull some hammies there for sure.
Oh, I'm in a walking shoe right now. So that's another story for another time. But so that's a game they lost, but I felt really good about that team because they didn't belong there in the first place, and they really showed up. They only lost that game by 14 points, if I'm not mistaken, and that's a game that really, if the 1980 game was the one that really introduced me to it the most, this is the one that just cemented everything for me. This is where I was a huge fan. So we don't see another AFC Championship game for another, my gosh, that almost 10 years.
Yep.
And that's that 1994 game that you spoke of. And we've got to talk about it because the title of the show is Fame and Shame. And that is the shame game. That was the ultimate bummer. And you mentioned that earlier because everybody thought they were going in. They had the team. They had a great season. They ended up 12-4 that year, but they were basically 12-3 because they lost the last game of the season because they didn't play anybody. They didn't play. I mean, and they almost beat San Diego in that game. I remember Andre Coleman running back for San Diego in that game. I believe it was a Christmas Eve game too. But that was a really fun game to talk about. Somebody just mentioned Lambert's last game. And do you remember what took out Lambert?
The dreaded turf toe.
That's why I'm in a boot.
Yeah.
So when the doctor told me 2 weeks ago, because I fell, he said, "You've got turf toe." And I've got some other things going on too, but I'm like, hey, that's Jack Lambert. So I tell Jeff Hartman, he's like, hey, Jack Lambert. So you're not playing this week. I'm like, no, I'm not playing. So I was inactive for the playoff game because of the same problem with Jack Lambert. I think that's what really ultimately put the Steelers out of it against Cleveland because I wasn't up to my fandom. I wasn't able to rock back and forth and pace because of the turf toe. So, but anyways, yeah, that was Lambert's last game. And then we will go back and talk about that dreaded game, 3 yards to go. Everybody thought they were going in. Alfred Papunu. Oh, I can't even say that name without shuddering. Alfred Papunu with that huge touchdown.
Tim McKyer, man.
I was just going to say the burnt blanket. They used to call Tim McKyer the burnt blanket, and that was a killer.
I feel bad that I harbored such a grudge against him for years, but took me a while to get over that.
And Bill Cowher, I read this recently. Bill Cowher said, my gosh. And his daughter came up to him and said, why don't you just run Barry Foster? He would have gotten you 3 yards. Now, hindsight is 2020. Should have they run that ball? 4th and 3, do you run that ball?
I don't know, man. It's pretty hard running the ball in from the 3-yard line. In that situation, if they had run the ball and they didn't get in, oh my gosh, the complaining. They're gonna run the ball there. So you're gonna lose, man. If you don't get in, it doesn't matter what you did, you're wrong. But fortunately for Bill Cowher, there was no internet or behind the steel curtain at that time, so nobody could absolutely destroy him. But I can still see it, man. Dennis Gibson, the linebacker, he made a nice play. I mean, O'Donnell actually put the ball in a pretty good spot down low for Foster to go down and get it, and Dennis Gibson came across his face and knocked it away. It was really, really nice play on his part.
And I remember my mom, she did not come down and watch the game with us, but and she didn't watch a lot of the games, and she has suffered from a bad back for years, and I remember she was having trouble with her back, so she was in bed, but she turned the game on, and I remember her saying to me, she's like, my gosh, that Sayal guy was everywhere. Yeah. He had 15 tackles in that game. Sayal was absolutely amazing, but the one guy that I blame for that loss, and I shouldn't, and my gosh, I revere this guy because he is one of my favorite Steelers from that era that people don't talk about. He didn't go to college. He's from Syracuse, New York. He played semi-pro ball, Ray Seals. But Ray Seals did something that was a little bit of a distraction, and he was the one who came up with the 60-Minute Men video. And do you remember the 60-Minute Men video?
Oh, yeah. The Steelers, they had their ticket to the Super Bowl written, and that was part of the problem.
Yeah, so I always blame that, and he gets a bad rap for that, and I'm the one who keeps bringing it up. So Ray, I'm sorry, but that was a killer. But the next year, we talked about that game extensively. They get in, and next thing you know, there's a drought again. They're not in the AFC Championship game until the 2001 season. It was the 13-3 year. It was the 9/11 year, and I've got tickets to the game. Oh, actually, I'm wrong. I apologize. 97. The 97 season, which I was at that game too.
Yeah.
So I digress. That was the game against Denver. I have great memories of staying over at our friend's house in Pittsburgh. We started tailgating at 4:00 in the morning. And I remember there's a breakfast casserole involved. Yeah. Oh, I didn't drink. I wasn't drinking before that game. I can honestly tell you, I'm not much of a drinker, but I have never drank an ounce of alcohol at a live Steelers game. I just don't, because that's I'm there for business. I'm focusing. But I remember buying my Jerome Bettis jersey, and I didn't have a lot of jerseys back then. I remember buying a Jerome Bettis jersey, a white jersey with the black numbers, the black letters, and that was the only year they wore black letters, 1997. So I remember buying that at that game, and I paid more for that jersey for the screen printed one than I do now for jerseys. I remember doing that. That game was a disappointment because Bettis had an amazing game. Bettis was really key in the playoffs, but Bettis ran for over 100 yards in that game. I lost my notes on Jerome there, but he had over 100 yards. He was amazing. Cordell just threw 3 picks in the end zone that I was in, and I mean they had, I think 2 of those picks were in the end zone where they were big swings, drive killers. The Steelers really should have played the Green Bay Packers in Super Bowl 32, but one of the few times that I actually rooted for the team that vanquished the Steelers in the Super Bowl was after that. I definitely rooted for Elway and company in that game to win that Super Bowl, but that was Cordell killed us.
It was 24-17, and the Steelers needed to get a stop, to get the ball back with a chance to tie it up, and Denver had maybe 2 minutes left, and if Denver converted, they could nail the clock out. So pretty much the game was on the line, and Denver had like a 3rd and 6, and Elway wound up hitting Shannon Sharp. First down. And I remember Shannon Sharp talking about that game years later on. He's on one of the game day shows, and he was talking about that game. He said in the huddle, Elway came in the huddle, and he just looked at Shannon Sharp and he said, "Get open." And I mean, that was the play. The play was get open. You just think like, you do all this X and O'ing, you do all this stuff to, try to out scheme your opponent. But sometimes it's just about get open.
Yeah, so that was a long drive home because I really thought they were going to the Super Bowl. 2001 was even worse of a drive home because my buddy that I talked about earlier, he had season tickets and we broke through on the lottery. So we were going to New Orleans. We had plane tickets. Yeah, you had to buy them in advance. We had the plane tickets. We had not only that, we had a hotel room. We had everything set up to go to that game, but a New England Patriots fan ended up sitting in our seats because they got to go instead. Troy Edwards steps out of bounds on a punt. They have to repunt. And then Troy Brown takes it to the house.
Yep.
That was a very weird game. I'm still mad about that game because that's the game where Jerome Bettis came on, and nobody talks about this. But I was watching Saturday on Sports on whatever it was called back then. That network at the time, it was KBL at one point. It changed, so Fox Sports Pittsburgh. It changed so many names. But Saverin on that 6:00 show had Bettis in the locker room, a soundbite, and he said it was weird. It's like they knew every play we were running before we ran. And then that was they considered that a Spygate game.
Yeah.
And so that I'm still upset about that. I did not get to go to the Super Bowl. I would have seen U2 in the Super Bowl. There were 4 or 5 former presidents at that game. Oh my gosh, I would have loved to have been there for that atmosphere. And that was the start of the New England dynasty. So I'm still a little salty on that. Real quick, do you have any thoughts about that game?
I refuse to talk about the New England Patriots, Brian.
Good.
I have very bitter memories about all our experiences with the Patriots, so I'm willing to skip over that right now.
Okay, I am going to talk about the next game that they lost to the New England Patriots just for a reason. This is one of my 2 a.m. stories. I'll go quick on this one because I want to get to the 2 really good ones coming up. So, first of all, the 2016 game with Pittsburgh and New England, it's not even to talk about. It was just a disappointment. That was the worst of them all. But the New England Patriot game where Rodney Harrison had the pick 6, I was in the stadium. And my buddy who was sitting next to me, we had a hotel room for the night, and there was a snowstorm that weekend. I was on a business trip in Miami, and in New Orleans, and I was supposed to go back to Johnstown and then drive to Pittsburgh to watch the game. But there was a problem with the plane. My luggage went somewhere else. I had nothing, so I had to go get clothes, and I got my Joey Porter jersey that weekend. So it's back and forth. Plexico catches that touchdown. My buddy, he was just like all over the place. He was like, "We're gonna lose. I told you, blah blah blah." And the next thing you know, we're gonna win. We're coming back. And then we're gonna lose. I'm leaving. So he leaves. And the worst thing that you can do is walk that concourse at Heinz Field and walk all the way back to your car after a loss, especially at night, because a loss to end your season, because fans are mad and there's fights. There's a potential for fights. So I'm like, dude, walk back to the hotel. I'll meet you back there. So I just stayed and sat in my seat. And this was one of the first years that they were going to do the celebration on the field. And Joe Namath was there. And I figured, I'll watch Joe Namath pass off the trophy. So there were not a lot of Patriots fans there, but the ones there, they went down. They went down and huddled by the stage, and that was in the end zone where I was at. So I decided, I'm going to walk down and get a closer look. And I get a closer look, and I run into this guy wearing a Ty Law jersey. Boom. Just like we knock into each other. And he goes like this. Whoa, sorry, man, sorry. And I look at him, and I said, congratulations, enjoy the Super Bowl. Have fun. He's like, and I can't do the accent because I'm horrible with accents, but he goes, what, are you kidding me? And I'm like, no, have fun at the game. He's like, you're the nicest Steeler fan I've met this whole weekend. I can't believe it. I'm like, hey, we watched this game for the same reason. Your team won, my team lost. Have fun. He goes, will you take a picture with me? I'm like, yeah, I'll take a picture with you, but I'm not smiling. He goes, you don't have to smile. So there's a picture of me somewhere with this guy. I'm wearing a Joey Porter jersey. He's wearing a Ty Law jersey. He's smiling. I'm like this. There's a picture somewhere, but that's how I approach my fandom. I'm like, hey, look, they're here for fun too. They're just with the wrong team. I can see me going to another stadium, and as long as hey, anybody's allowed in my living room, just don't pee on my couch. And that's how I feel about when you come to Heinz Field, and that's the way I approach it too. So, they put their jerseys on the same way that I do, but theirs are just uglier than mine.
Your jersey right now, by the way, your Ampipe Bulldogs jersey is fantastic, man.
Thank you so much. Filmed in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. I was actually at the game that they filmed the football game. I have some great stories of that. That's going to be a later off-season Tales from 2 a.m. We can talk about that. That'll be a lot of fun. So we're getting to wrap up soon. We got to talk about the two big ones. The Denver one was fun. It kind of felt anticlimactic in a way after it was kind of like when the USA beat Russia in hockey in 1980, with the Steelers beating the Colts in that dramatic fashion. And the next thing you know, they're playing, my gosh, what were they? US was playing either Sweden or Finland. I think it was Sweden. I mess that up all the time. It was Sweden. The Steelers playing Denver and Jake Plummer. It was kind of anticlimactic, but it was awesome. It was a great feeling. I remember just being elated. Do you have any quick thoughts on that game before we get to Troy Polamalu and the pick six?
Yeah, play action pass, man. Ben Roethlisberger came out. That was play action Ben. I guess Wisenhunt was the OC, and in both that Colts game and that Denver game, the Steelers got out early on them. Not by pound and Bettis, which I'm sure is what everybody was expecting, but by running a lot of play action, hitting Heath Miller, down the seam, and that was just one of those times where the game plan was so good and the execution was great, and it just sort of kind of felt like it was taking on a life of its own. So yeah, I just remember Roethlisberger playing with a lot of energy, and the Steelers getting up big and feeling not like sometimes when you get an early lead you're nervous because it's like hold on, but those were that Broncos game was one where the Steelers got out ahead, and I felt really confident early on. Hey, we're going to win this thing.
And that game was really, it never seemed in doubt. Ben threw a beautiful pass to Hines Ward in the back of the end zone. And if I'm not mistaken, didn't Ben do finger guns in that game?
Yeah, finger guns. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that. And for some reason, I just remember the elation of hearing Tunch go, because he did it the weekend before, and he said he wasn't going to do it, like call your travel agent, but this time he was able to say, call your travel agent, get tickets for Detroit. And so I'm like, yes. And I mean, that was a great feeling. But one of my favorite AFC Championship memories was the last victory. It happened in 2008, and I remember it was great for me because the next day was going to be, it was Martin Luther King Day the next day, so I was off of work. So I can just relax and enjoy it and know that I could stay up and watch highlights after if they would win, and I could relax more during this game. So this game, they came out, that 2008 team came out pretty well on Baltimore. Lima Swede had that drop. Everyone wants to talk about that drop. Ryan Clark knocks out.
Oh my gosh.
I still feel bad for Willis McGahee. I mean, he just absolutely cracked him, and it wasn't a dirty hit.
It was 2008 football, man. Still Ravens.
It wasn't helmet to helmet, but so I got to tell you. Then there's the moment. I believe there's like 5:43 left or something in the game. Not a lot of people realize they had a chance to take the lead there.
16-14.
Yeah. Joe Flacco goes back to pass. And was that a 43-yard return by number 43, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah. That's right.
Your thoughts on that? And then I got to throw my thoughts on that because something happened there.
I was at my buddy Ed's house. Ed was a founding member of the Steel Curtain football games at the bank where we're throwing each other through the shrubs. I'd taken many trips out to Pittsburgh with Ed. You know, like he's my oldest, you know, Steeler fan buddy. We've known each other since we were 8 years old and been through a lot of Steelers games together. I was at his house in the basement watching that game. And Ravens got the ball back 16-14, whatever it was, 4 or 5 minutes left. All they got to do is get in field goal range. And I'm like, you know, up and pacing. I'm like, Ed, I got a bad feeling. Ed, I got a bad feeling. And I remember what he said. He said, don't worry. He's like, Palomalu's going to make a play. And like 2 plays later, boom, pick 6.
And
you are a sage, Ed. You are a sage.
That's awesome. And not only was it a pick 6, it was a zigzag pick 6. It was a signature Troy return. Oh, we were elated. So we were in my basement, and we call my basement Steeler Central. And I told you that I was in West Virginia at one time. I used to go to I lived there for 9 years, and we used to go to my good friend Tommy Regan. We used to go to Tommy's house all the time and watch the games there. He called it Steeler Central. And it was a thing. Even if he was at the game, he wouldn't tell anybody he was going because he wanted you to show up at his house and watch the game. It was one of those deals. He had a great bachelor house, and we watched all those games there. So when I moved to Maryland, I had all these friends that were from Western PA, from Pittsburgh, they were Steeler fans, and they would come over and watch the games, and they still do. And we regular season game, we treat it like a Super Bowl. My wife puts together the menu, and we try to do theme menus. Sometimes we do all kinds of stuff, but it's a feast. And this was no exception. We had a feast, and there was only about 5 or 6 guys in the basement that weekend. And there was the ladies were down there too. And when Troy picks that ball off and goes to the end zone, we all jump up, and it's like the mound. It's the 9th inning, the mound, the final out. You win the World Series, and you do the scrum on the mound, and we're just jumping up, hugging, dancing around. And what happens when you're in those? Arms are flailing, right?
I know somebody's getting hurt here.
I got cold cocked. I got knocked down.
Yeah.
Somebody cracked me. I still don't know which one of my buddies, and they're still all my buddies. I don't know who hit me. I know it wasn't intentional. I fell down. I got back up and jumped back in, and we're like, woo! And I went back, and I ran upstairs. For some of the people were still upstairs, like my wife was still upstairs. I ran upstairs, and I said, "We won!" And she goes, "What's wrong with what's up with your face?" I'm like, "Oh, I got punched in the face." They're like, "What? Who punched you? What did you do?" I'm like, "Nothing." We're celebrating. His arms fly. So that I talked about the champagne burn in my eyes. This hurt even more, but like John Mellencamp says, or he was just Johnny Cougar back then when he said it, hurts so good. And it hurts so good to watch the Steelers win. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm a warrior. I'm like Matakevich. I'm that guy. Dirty bad. You can just call me Dirty Bad. But hey, thanks so much for talking about this. This is the Steelers aren't in the game, but we have had the pleasure of watching so many AFC Championship games over the year. They're gonna come back. We're gonna get a chance to see them again. We don't know what the date on the calendar, what year it's gonna be. Hopefully, it's gonna be sooner rather than later. But it's so fun to talk about these games, Kevin, and I really enjoy doing it with you. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I hope they're good games today. Let's give us something fun to watch.
You know what? I hope they will be. They will never be as good as some of the 8 that we just talked about, but they will be good for fans of 2 different cities. So I'm getting ready to watch those games, and I'm really going to enjoy it. But we will be back next week. We will start talking about some Super Bowl memories. I'll have you back in a couple weeks if you want to come on for the Super Bowl show. I think we can have a lot of fun during those games too. And really the good and the bad, because there's a lot of great stories out of the bad games too, as well. Because man, I could talk about. I've rewatched the Dallas game so many times. Super Bowl 30. I've watched it so many times, and I keep on thinking, oh, just a little tweak here and a little tweak here. They could have done it. But with that being said, Kevin, have a great week.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Everybody out there, God bless, man. Thank you, guys.
All right. One of our best guests ever, Kevin Smith. Thanks so much. For Kevin, my name is Bryan Anthony Davis. Remember, behind the steel curtain for all your Pittsburgh Steelers needs, everything that you want. There's going to be breaking news this week. You're going to get it here first. So just definitely check it out. We will see you next time. And remember, it might be 10 o'clock where you're at. It might be 7 o'clock where you're at, but it's 2 a.m. somewhere. We'll see you.